and welcome to Interface. My name is Thembi Samachele. Now this week, the shooting of Reeva Steenkamp in Oscar Pistorius' home dominated headlines. Another big story recently has been the brutal rape and murder of Anene Booysen in the Western Cape. The discourse around these and other stories has brought the issue of violence against women to the fore. This is the topic of discussion on Interface tonight, and we're trying to get into the psyche of men who kill and rape women and children. And just to be clear, we're not passing judgment on whether Oscar Pistorius is guilty or not. The police and the justice system will take care of that. We're just simply using this case as an example where a woman tragically lost her life in a violent manner. First up, though, let's take a quick look at this insert compiled by Genosi Queenie.
Drumming up support for the fight against women and child abuse. A call to South African men to stop this heinous crime.
When women in South Africa can no longer be respected for being themselves, for wearing a panty, because you wear a panty you are vulnerable, because you are a woman you are vulnerable, because you are a girl child, you saw the exhibition, there's small panties, you will be raped. And we would like to make everyone aware that even 97-year-olds grandmothers are raped. They need to change the laws, make things stronger. The police system must make sure that it also works for the women. The justice system also. We've had one case that took 5 years, and that is not acceptable.
For centuries, men's status within society has been accepted as that of protector. Not anymore, at least according to a 1999 study by the Medical Research Council. Young women in South Africa are more likely to be murdered by their intimate partner, and women between 24 and 34 years are the most vulnerable. The study also shows that a woman dies at the hands of an intimate partner every 6 hours. The Medical Research Council says that the murder of a female by an intimate partner or femicide is the most extreme form of violence against women. Guns and alcohol seem to be fueling the scourge. In most femicides, there is a history of domestic violence, and women become more at risk when they decide to leave an abusive relationship. Meanwhile, it seems that authorities are at a loss in efforts to stem the tide of violence against women and children. At a conviction rate of 37%, activists believe men are literally getting away with murder. As if that's not enough, alongside its love for soccer, South Africa has also become infamous as a country where rape is a national sport.
The brutal gang rape and murder of Anene Booysen and other women and girls in recent times has brought into sharp focus the need for unity in action to eradicate the scourge. The brutality and cruelty meted out to defenseless women is unacceptable.
Genosi Queenie, Interface.
Now, SMS line is open. We welcome your thoughts, 33726, or you can just drop us your line on Facebook. That's Interface on SABC3, or you can email us. That's interfaceon3@sabc.co.za. Let me introduce our guest tonight. Professor Rachel Jukes is from the South African Medical Research Council. Lerato Molloy is from the South African Institute for Race Relations, and Ben Bredasdorp is from the support group Men Understanding Respect and Love, and we're going to call it Mural. That's how you say it for short. Welcome to all three of you. It's an emotional issue. It is a very sad issue, but a very real one, brought to the fore by these very big cases that we've spoken about. Lerato, just take us through the stats. One of the big ones that you released this Friday, about 2,500 adult women are murdered in South Africa every year. That is a shocking statistic.
It is shocking. So according to our annual South Africa survey with data from the South African Police Service, we found that 2,500 adult women are murdered every year. And if you break this down to daily incident rates, it's 7 women every day that are being murdered. And this is just for murder. So we look at contact crimes as well, and these include assault, common assault, assault with the intent to do grievous bodily harm, sexual offences, and then murder. And when you look at this number, it increases exponentially to plus minus 200,000 cases every year, which is even more shocking than the 2,500 women being killed every year. And then also, according to anecdotal evidence, this is very hard to collect, but women don't report these cases. So if someone gets raped or someone gets beaten by their boyfriend, for example, they don't necessarily go to the police station to report such a case. So we have reason to believe that these numbers are much higher than ones that are collected by the South African Police Service.
And in fact, your reporting rate is at around 43%.
Yes, 57% of cases, and I mean this is not just for rape or sexual assault or murder, but 57% of all cases in the country go by unreported.
My goodness. Professor Jukes, what is going on here? Obviously this is not unique to South Africa, this is happening the world over, but our stats are just so high. Why is this happening in this country?
Well, I think that there are a number of things. One is that we have a very marked gender hierarchy in South Africa. South Africa is a very hierarchical country, and men see themselves very firmly positioned as being superior to women. And the idea that women should be subordinate to you and that you should control women in your lives, and if necessary use violence to control women, is something that is actually legitimated as part of South African culture. So men are rewarded for demonstrating how successful they are with women, having lots of partners, but they're also rewarded for then being able to keep those partners, despite the fact that very often they have a lot of partners. And in the context of of relationships where men are struggling to prove themselves with more women, they're trying to control women, South African women are increasingly becoming empowered and sort of question and resist different types of control by men. Then very often that is a situation in which gives rise to these very high prevalence rates of violence. But
I find that a little difficult to believe, the first part of your answer, and that is just based on what we saw in that insert. Ginosi was talking about how men in the African context especially have always been the protectors, and they have this very revered role as protector of the society and their families. And now that issue of control manifesting in violence, is that a new thing, or is that something that's always been there and is only made worse by the empowerment of women?
No, I think it's very important not to say that. That men, the sort of patriarchal position of African men has very strongly always been there. And the idea that women would then be subservient to them within a family is definitely there. I mean, the work that we've done in rural areas, looking really at what is understood around what's legitimate around the use of violence, does suggest, though, that to use some violence against women is regarded as culturally legitimate by men. To mark a woman, hit her on the head, bruise her or whatever, and definitely kill her, is not seen as culturally legitimate. So I'd never say that there's anything in African culture that legitimates that form of violence against women. But in terms of an African patriarchy, then very much, yes, providing is part of it, and yes, protecting is part of it, but we also have to understand that sort of ideals around manhood of a 18 or, these days 22, 25, 28-year-old man is very different from the ideals of what makes a man successful if you're 40 or 50.
Okay. Ben, your organization, the support group that you run, Men Understanding Respect and Love, brings together men that have abused or are currently abusing their partners. Tell us a little bit about the kind of men that comes to this organization.
Well, I think that we are surprised because it is people from all walks of life, and I don't think one could categorize it. I think one's first reaction is to try and say, well, can we make sense out of it? That, does it come from a specific group? But we have wealthy men, as we've seen with Oscar Pistorius. We have people, the professional people, we have people in office jobs from all walks of life, and it's quite an endemic thing.
Yes. Now, we're going to take a short break, and I want us to talk a little bit more about, you know, what is happening and what we can do about it. And I'm glad that this issue has, and glad in a very loose manner, I use that word, that the issue has come to the fore, that we can talk about it to get to the solutions. And I'd like to get your thoughts about the policy direction that the country is taking, if there is any way that we can influence that. But we need to take a short break. Remember that you can also join the conversation, 33726, that's our SMS line, interface on 3 at sabc.co.za, that's our email, and interface at SABC, that is our Facebook page. We're back after this. You're watching Interface here on SABC3. We're talking about violence against women and children, talking to Professor Rachel Jukes, who is with the MRC, and we're also talking to Lerato Moloi, who is with the South African Institute of Race Relations, and Ben Bredasdorp, who is from the support group Mural, and that is Men Understanding Respect and Love. Ben, we talked a little bit about whether or not there's a kind of men that is prone to violence, and I want us to just explore that a little bit more. Do you find that men that maybe grew up in a certain kind of environment, who have certain childhood issues or that kind of thing, are more prone to violence? Is that still prevalent in our society today, or is it just any man or any kind of man that can do this?
It's obviously a very difficult question that you're asking me. We've had some research done in our group in terms of, you know, what causes or what caused men in our group to act in a violent and an abusive way, and it was interesting to see that that one couldn't really put your finger on something very specific. I guess at the end of the day, it is the way that men are being socialized. And what I find interesting and I think alarming is that if you look at men, there's a whole range of irresponsible behavior which men exhibit on a daily basis. I wouldn't say all men, but a great part of men seem to behave in an irresponsible way over a wide range of social behaviors. Maybe having affairs, or maybe punishing their children in an inappropriate way, or not working, or failing at work, etc., etc. And I think that all of these factors can contribute to men behaving in a violent and abusive way.
Is this poverty driven? Is this because we have so much poverty in South Africa, and therefore the frustrations of maybe a lot of men not working, taking that out on their partners? Is that why we are in this situation? I'm not sure how far your research has gone, if you have a contribution to this issue, but let me give you a chance to give us your thoughts.
Sure. Well, in 2011 we started a project entitled the Family Project, and just trying to get into the South African family and just try to get an overall picture of what is happening. And on the little bit of research that we did do in that field, we found that absent fatherhood is becoming a big problem, and it has different results for boys and girls. So what we found is that with girls, if you have an absent father, you're more likely to fall pregnant at a young age, not get married and divorced. And what we found with young guys is that they exhibit hyper masculine behavior. So this is obviously across the board, because you can have an absent father who has a lot of money, like Mr. Bredasdorp said, or you can also have an absent father who's unemployed, for example. There are many reasons why fathers are absent in their children's lives, but what we did find is that if a young boy grows up without a father, they start to exhibit hyper-masculine behavior, and that might be one of the explanations as to why we're becoming such a violent nation, because fathers just aren't present in their children's lives.
And I can just hear a lot of single mothers in this country saying, really, after we've worked so hard to try and bring our sons up the best way we can, could my child be prone to this kind of violence simply because the father is absent?
Well, I think the absent father is is key, but I think it's how it plays out in terms of the child's sort of upbringing and home environment that's also very important. And clearly poverty is an element. We always say that gender-based violence cuts across all social groups. You can have very wealthy men who rape and very wealthy men who are violent towards partners. But there is no doubt that if you're growing up in a situation where financial resources are stressed at home, that's going to have a huge impact on the parenting and the home environment offered to children. We know that if mothers are poor, if they're depressed, if they're experiencing violence themselves, they're much more likely then to use sort of harsh punishment, and the child ends up being subjected to different forms of trauma at home. We know that if boys are subjected to trauma in childhood, that it has an enduring impact on their brain development, and it makes them, they have much lower self-esteem, and they are much more likely to want to hang out with other boys and then try and demonstrate their power in ways that like gangs do, basically get involved in delinquent antisocial behaviour and exhibit these sort of hyper-masculine behaviours, so that, you know, in a way their focus for their self-esteem becomes on getting and controlling women, for example, rather than on doing really well at school and hoping to go to university and become a lawyer. So it is very important to understand how poverty and the problems we have with our education system and lack of aspirations for youth due to very high levels of unemployment
impact. And then the question becomes, why does a wealthy person in an affluent neighborhood who's grown up with all of the joys in life end up doing the same thing that a person growing up in a poverty-stricken area does? It just simply doesn't add up. But we're going to continue chatting about that. We have to take a quick break. But before we do, Rachel, I'd like you to respond to something. I knew this would probably come up. We've had some viewers saying, you know, you're being very patronizing to African men in particular by suggesting that having them growing in a patriarchal society and their culture actually propels them towards violence.
Well, it's not being patronising to African men. There's a wealth of research showing that growing up in a patriarchal society propels them towards violence. And it doesn't even apply just to Africa. I mean, the same applies to India, the same applies to other countries in Asia, the same applies to countries like Peru that has very high violence in Latin America. It's a fact. Violence against women is rooted in patriarchy.
All right, we take a short break. Keep those thoughts coming through 3726 on SMS or on our Facebook page. That's Interface on SABC3. Back after this. Welcome back to Interface. Just a quick look at some of your Facebook messages. Denzel Roy says, don't make this a race issue. Let's find solutions to the problem. Mteteleli Njobololo says, I always thought South African laws are the best, except when it comes to implementation. South Africa has a problem of dysfunctional families, and the programs we see in the media for how to get out of an abusive relationship. You'll never see or hear about programs which talk about how to build a good relationship. Blondi Machata says, to simply say, give these guys a life sentence is not enough. We can't throw resources at the problem to fight the scourge. This is a social problem that must be dealt with harshly through the judicial system. Beatrice Chandia says, we need more fathers to teach their sons how to treat women. Real men don't just make babies, they look after them. And of course, some of these SMSs are also talking about the issue of African men and how violence plays around in the culture. And I think you've already responded to that. So, just before we continue, you were making a good point during the break, Ben, about not just the patriarchal society as it relates to African men, black men in particular, but that white men also have an issue around that.
Yes, I think I would like to add to what Rachel is saying, is that also from a white perspective, is that whites come from a very autocratic background where there were suppression of people, where they weren't care for other people, and also very myopic. So you know, things have changed, but I do think that in the white community we have the same problem.
Okay. Now, government intervention. I know for a fact that you're not impressed by what the government has done so far in trying to deal with the scourge. But before we give you a chance to give your thoughts on that, Lerato, what policy interventions need to be made over and above what's currently being done to make some kind of difference on this issue?
Okay, the first one that I'd like to mention, and one that's very close to my heart, seeing as though we were working on the family project, it's just there's never really been a family policy in South Africa to deal with things such as absent fathers, for example, which is it's a problem on a national scale. And I know the Department of Social Development is working on the white paper for families, and hopefully that will go a long way in trying.
What can the government do? Do they hunt these fathers down and try and make them
just
look after their children?
What I was going to move on from that is that that's going to take a while to kind of get the wheels running of it and get fathers that are responsible for their own children. But in the meantime, seeing as though these violent crimes are occurring, I think we need to have better resourced police stations where there are specific investigators for rape and family violence. We have these special victims units that have been that were launched in 2010.
Yes.
But if you go to the 15-year-old on the street that has been raped, I don't think she knows much about that. I don't think she knows where to go. I don't think she knows what to say. And it's very daunting if you've been abused to walk into a police station where you won't get help.
For those.
Yes, and we need better resource. They need to be better resourced. They need to be specific people that have the expertise and skills to deal with that. And then I also just think we need to have conversations around particularly gun policy. The Firearms Control Act of 2000 specifically states that if you have any history of violence, your gun license should be revoked or you shouldn't get one in the first place. Now, with regard to this Oscar Pistorius story, and I know he hasn't been tried and there's no conclusion on the matter yet, but it should never get to a point where someone who supposedly has a history of violence gets to the point where they shoot and murder someone. So we have these amazing policies, like one of our listeners said, that aren't being implemented correctly, and we just need to have better conversations around these.
What more should the government be doing?
Well, the government has to take on board primary prevention of rape. All the focus of government intervention has been on the criminal justice system, but rape in South Africa is perpetrated by between a quarter and a third of men. We can't lock up a quarter or a third of men in this country. What we have to do is to stop them acting. And similarly, intimate partner violence, we're talking about over 40% of men, so it's nearly 1 in 2 men who ever hit a woman. And the proportion who hit women repeatedly and expose their wives or girlfriends to severe violence is over 1 in 5. So we really need population-wide prevention policies. Yes, it is true that we have to end impunity, so that means that we have to beef up the whole policing element. But I feel very depressed when I hear that the first policy the government's going to come up with is reinstituting the sexual offences courts, because although we do need them, and I think that that's important, we did have them before and they didn't make any impact on rape. So what we need to do is we need to bring in more interventions. We need to look at what is the evidence for what's driving the problem. We need to deal with the gender issues in this country. We need to deal with these childhood issues in this country, and I firmly believe that some form of family policy has got to be part of it. And we have to do other things, like, as one of your the viewers mentioned, teach people how to conduct a good relationship, because that is actually important in preventing violence.
We're running out of time, but Ben, can men, and I know that some men also get abused, we're not overlooking that fact, but the bulk of the violence is against women. So can men change? And I'm assuming you're a changed man. How did you do it?
Well, I think in terms, just listening to the other participants, it is true that I think men in South Africa is in serious trouble. We need to step up to the plate and take responsibility for what we are doing and for who we are. And communication is a very important part of that. So on the one hand, I'm sure there's a lot of structural and formal things that needs to be done, but on an informal basis, I think the whole thing of masculinity as to why it's defined and how it's defined is very important. But I believe men can change. But men need to start looking at themselves. They need to give each other feedback. They need to raise issues with each other. And they've got to step up. They have to come forward, and they've got to protect their families.
And just before we go, if there's a man that's watching and has been violent with his partner or his children and didn't think he had a problem and now thinks, okay, maybe I should do something about this, give us quickly your website or a quick telephone number that they can maybe call and make contact.
Thank you. I'd like them to phone myself. My name is Ben, and my number is 079 490 1820.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, my guests, for coming through, and thank you for taking part in this very emotional topic and very emotional program, and thank you for getting your thoughts to us. That's where we have to leave it for tonight. Remember that you can still continue chatting to us on our interface on SABC3 at sabc.co.za. That's our website, or you can catch us on Facebook. From me, Thembisa Magele, and the team, good night.